Welcome to the deep dive. We cut through the noise to get you straight to the heart of what's truly important. Today, we're tackling, well, one of those big, enduring questions. What actually makes for a life well lived?
It's a huge question, isn't it? Something people have asked forever. You see endless books, trends. But for this deep dive, we're offering you a shortcut, a really well-informed one. We're distilling some groundbreaking new research that tries to get at exactly that.
That's right. We're diving deep into the very first wave of the Global Flourishing Study, the GFS. We're pulling straight from their initial report. Our mission, to pull out the most important stuff, the surprising bits, so you get a solid handle on this without wading through all the data yourself.
Exactly. And the GFS, I mean, it's this massive, really unprecedented research project. It's designed to properly understand human flourishing. And when they say flourishing, they mean something quite specific. The relative attainment of a state in which all aspects of a person's life are good, including the context in which that person lives.
Okay, so it's definitely not just about feeling happy, or being physically healthy. It's much broader. A really holistic view, trying to capture the richness of life beyond just one or two things. So today he's going to learn how to actually define and measure this across 6 core areas or domains. We'll look at what makes this GFS study really stand out from others. And then, yeah, we'll get into some fascinating findings. Some are kind of surprising, actually.
Definitely. We'll look at how flourishing changes with age, across cultures, the state of mental health globally, which is a big topic. Also, the impact of community, group activities, and maybe unsurprisingly, the role of financial stability. And the scale here is just immense, over 207,000 people from 23 really diverse countries and territories. It's huge.
Wow. So with that kind of scope, the first maybe obvious question is, how do you even start measuring something like flourishing? How do they define it in this study?
Well, like we just said, it's that big definition. The relative attainment of a state in which all aspects of a person's life are good, and crucially, including the context in which that person lives.
Mm.
It really focuses on how all these different parts of life interact. You don't live in a bubble.
Right. It sounds incredibly complex, multidimensional.
Right.
Are there specific features they highlight about this definition?
Yeah, they point out 3 key things. First, it is multidimensional. You can be doing great in one area, maybe work, but maybe struggling a bit with relationships, for example.
Makes sense. You can thrive in some ways and not others.
Exactly. Second, they see it as a process, not like a destination you arrive at. You're always kind of on a journey towards flourishing. It's dynamic.
Okay, not a fixed date.
Right. And third, while it's about your personal experience, your subjective state, it's heavily shaped by your community, your environment. The well-being of the group is actually part of your well-being in this view.
That really broadens things out, doesn't it? Beyond just how I feel right now. So, okay, to capture all that complexity, they use 6 core domains. What are they?
So the first one is happiness and life satisfaction. This is measured with questions like, overall, how satisfied are you with life as a whole these days? Things like that.
Pretty standard stuff for well-being surveys, maybe?
Yeah, and also, in general, how happy or unhappy do you usually feel? That kind of thing.
Okay, what's next?
Then you've got mental and physical health. Again, pretty direct questions. In general, how would you rate your physical health? And how would you rate your overall mental health?
Right.
Third is meaning and purpose. This gets into things like, overall, to what extent do you feel the things you do in your life are worthwhile? Or asking if you agree with, I understand my purpose in life.
Interesting. That feels deeper than just happiness.
Definitely. Then fourth, there's character and virtue. This is maybe less common in some surveys. It looks at things like agreement with, I always act to promote good in all circumstances, or I am always able to give up some happiness now for greater happiness later. Sort of self-control and ethics.
Character and virtue. Okay.
Yep.
And number 5.
Number 5 is close social relationships, measured by things like I am content with my friendships and relationships, and my relationships are as satisfying as I would want them to be. How connected do you feel, basically?
Crucial. And the last one.
Finally, number 6 is financial and material stability. Questions like, how often do you worry about being able to meet normal monthly living expenses, or worry about safety, food, or housing? Basic security needs.
Got it. And you said each domain has 2 questions rated 0 to 10.
That's right. 2 questions per domain, all on that 0-10 scale. Provides a nice bit of depth for each area.
And they combine these somehow. You mentioned a flourishing index.
Yes. The flourishing index is basically the average score of the first 5 domains. So happiness, health, purpose, character, and relationships.
So financial stability is kept separate sometimes. Why is that?
Well, it's definitely seen as part of overall well-being, but it often acts as a really strong driver or predictor of the other domains.
Hmm.
So by looking at it separately sometimes, they can better show how strongly it influences everything else.
Okay, that makes sense. It lets you see its impact more clearly.
Exactly. And this whole framework, these 6 domains, it really helps us get past overly simple ideas of being well. It captures the real, methy, complex picture of a good life.
So we have this comprehensive definition, these 6 domains, but what makes the GFS itself so special? You said there are other well-being studies. What sets this one apart?
Great question. It really stands out in, I'd say, 3 main ways. The first one is absolutely critical. It's longitudinal design,
Longitudinal, meaning,
meaning they survey the exact same people year after year. Most big multi-country studies just take a snapshot. They survey different people each time. That's called cross-sectional.
okay, and why is tracking the same people such a big deal for understanding flourishing? What does that let you do?
It's a huge leap. A snapshot study might show, say, that people who volunteer are happier. Correlation. But you don't know if volunteering causes happiness or if happier people just volunteer more. With longitudinal data, following the same people, you can start to see what comes first. Does getting involved in the community lead to an increase in flourishing later on? It lets you get much closer to understanding causation, not just correlation. What factors are really responsible for change?
Ah, okay, so it moves beyond just seeing links to potentially seeing what actually drives flourishing. That's powerful.
Hugely powerful.
Yeah.
The second unique thing is its global diversity and scope. We mentioned over 207,000 people. They're from 22 countries, plus Hong Kong. And it's a really broad mix, different continents, cultures, economic levels. They estimate it covers something like 64% of the world's population.
Wow. So they're deliberately avoiding just focusing on, what is it, weird countries.
Exactly. Not just Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic societies,
Wow.
which, unfortunately, a lot of psychological research has historically focused on.
And why is that diversity so important here?
Because it helps answer. Are these patterns universal? Is what makes someone flourish in, say, Sweden, the same as in Kenya or the Philippines? Or does context matter massively? This diversity lets you test that.
Makes perfect sense. You get a much more complete picture of humanity. What's the third differentiator?
Their commitment to transparency and reproducibility? They partnered with the Center for Open Science, COS. This means they're committed to sharing their data, pre-registering their study plans, documenting everything really thoroughly.
Partnering with COS, yeah, that's a big signal for scientific rigor, isn't it? Like they're showing their work.
Absolutely. It builds trust. It means other researchers can check their findings, build on them. It's really good practice, especially for a study this ambitious.
So putting it all together, longitudinal, incredibly diverse, and transparent, it means the findings we're about to talk about are built on a really solid foundation.
Extremely solid, which makes the insights really valuable.
Okay, let's dive into some of those key findings from this first wave then. What's the current state of flourishing around the world, according to the GFS?
Well, the first thing is it varies a lot. That flourishing index score, 0 to 10, big differences between countries.
Where are people reporting the highest levels of flourishing?
The top scores came from Indonesia, actually, with an average of 8.47, then Mexico at 8.19, and the Philippines at 8.11.
Interesting. And on the lower end?
The lowest average scores were in Japan at 5.93, then Turkey at 6.59, and the UK at 6.88.
Quite a range there. But you mentioned earlier it's not just about the overall score, right? It's about the different domains within countries.
Exactly. This is where you see some really interesting patterns of surpluses and deficits. For example, happiness and life satisfaction. These tend to be relative deficits in many countries.
Meaning lower scores in that domain compared to their overall average flourishing.
Precisely. Particularly noticeable in places like Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, Tanzania, and Turkey.
Okay, but here's the surprising part you hinted at.
Yes. Mental health and meaning purpose often emerge as relative surpluses in some of those same regions, or similar ones. Think Egypt, Israel, Kenya, Nigeria, Poland, South Africa, Tanzania.
Wow. Hold on. So in some countries where reported happiness might be lower, people report higher than average levels of mental health and purpose.
That's what the data suggests. It really challenges that simple idea that happiness is the only thing that matters, or that all aspects of well-being move together.
And you said purpose is also a surplus in India and Turkey.
Correct. And this picture contrasts quite a bit with many high-income countries, Australia, Germany, Sweden, the UK, the US, where mental health and purpose are often kind of average or even slight deficits, relative to their overall flourishing score.
That's fascinating. Can you give a specific country example?
Tanzania is a really stark one. They have the largest relative deficit in life satisfaction across all the countries studied. Huge gap. But at the same time, they report the largest relative surplus in self-reported mental health.
Incredible. High mental health, low satisfaction. It shows just how complex this is.
Absolutely. And another nuance, understanding your purpose and finding life worthwhile. Those two purpose questions, they don't always track together at the country level. For instance, in India, Nigeria, South Africa, Turkey, people reported lower scores on finding life worthwhile compared to their overall flourishing, but higher scores on understanding their purpose.
Subtle distinction, but important. One seems more about feeling good about daily activities, the other about a bigger picture sense of meaning.
Something like that. And speaking of big picture influences, financial stability. The report really emphasizes this one.
What did they find there? Is it universally important?
Universally, yes. Across all 23 countries and territories, financial and material stability was a strong predictor of flourishing.
And that holds up even when you account for other things, like education, age, relationships.
Yes, the analysis controlled for other known predictors, and the link remained robust. It suggests that feeling financially secure has a really fundamental connection to overall well-being.
It's not just about, buying nice things. It's probably about reducing stress, enabling choices.
Exactly. Relief from chronic worry, ability to meet basic needs, maybe pursue education or health goals. That foundational security seems critical.
How big is the effect? Did they quantify it?
They did. They showed a really substantial difference in flourishing scores between people reporting the lowest financial security, like a 0 to 3 score on that scale, and those reporting the highest, say 7 to 10. The gap was significant.
So that baseline level of stability really matters. It's not just a nice to have.
Seems that way. These findings really paint a picture of flourishing as, well, not monolithic at all. It's this complex tapestry, different strengths, different challenges across the globe.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Another area where assumptions often get challenged is age. You hear about the midlife crisis or that happiness follows a U-shape over life. What did the GFS find about age and flourishing?
Right. That U-shape is famous in well-being research. Happier young, dip in the middle, happier older. But the GFS data, it shows it's much more varied than that. No single universal pattern.
So what are they seeing? How does flourishing change with age in different places?
It really depends on the country. In quite a few, flourishing actually increases with age. This was seen in Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Germany, Mexico, Spain, Sweden, the UK, and the US.
Increases. So older people are generally flourishing more in those countries.
On average, yes. Take the US, for example. The average flourishing score for 18 to 29-year-olds was 6.36. For those aged 60 to 69, it jumped to 7.68.
That's a pretty big jump on a 10-point scale.
It is a really meaningful difference. But then, as you might guess,
It goes the other way somewhere else.
exactly. In Israel, Poland, Egypt, India, Kenya, the Philippines, and Tanzania, they observed flourishing actually decreasing with age.
Decreasing. Wow, any examples there?
Tanzania, again, provides a clear picture. Young adults, 18-29, averaged 7.83 on flourishing. But by age 60-69, the average dropped to 7.04.
So the opposite trend to the U.S.
Completely. And then you have other patterns, too, like a J-shape in Hong Kong, and Japan starts high, dips, then goes back up a bit. An inverse J in Indonesia and China starts lower, peaks, then declines.
And some places, no clear pattern at all.
Right. Nigeria, South Africa, Turkey, no obvious link between age and overall flourishing in this first wave. It really highlights how much context matters.
Okay, what about health specifically? Does physical health show a clear trend with age?
Generally, yes, physical health tends to decline with age, which is sort of expected. Although, interestingly, in Australia, Brazil, and the US, self-reported physical health stayed roughly level across age groups. But overall, across most countries, physical health is a relative surplus for younger people and becomes a relative deficit for older people compared to their overall flourishing.
Makes intuitive sense. What about mental health? That's a huge topic now, especially for young people. Is there a universal age trend there?
No, not universal, and this is where it gets really striking, connecting to current concerns. In some countries, China, Egypt, Israel, Japan, Kenya, Nigeria, Poland, South Africa, Tanzania, mental health scores were relatively high, a surplus or neutral, across all age groups.
Okay, so stable or high across the lifespan in those places.
But in most other countries surveyed, there was a very different pattern. Mental health was often a relative deficit for young individuals
Mm.
and then became a surplus or neutral for older individuals.
A deficit for the young. So younger people are reporting lower mental health compared to older adults in many parts of the world.
That's the pattern seen in this data, yes. Particularly strong in places like Brazil, Sweden, and the United States.
The U.S. example.
In the U.S., the average mental health score for 18-29-year-olds was 5.68. For the 60-69 group, 8.06. That's a massive difference.
Wow. That really does align with all the talk about a youth mental health crisis.
It does seem to reflect those concerns quite directly in the data.
It brings up that classic research question, doesn't it? Is this an age effect? People just naturally get better mental health as they mature? Or is it a cohort effect? Maybe today's young people are facing unique pressures, and their mental health trajectory might look different over their lifetime compared to older generations.
That's exactly the question the longitudinal data will hopefully shed more light on over time. Are these young people going to catch up as they age, or is this a generational shift?
And the answer has huge implications for policy, for support.
Absolutely. The good news, if you can call it that, is that it's not necessarily destiny. Policies focused on supporting youth well-being could potentially change that trajectory for younger cohorts.
It's vital stuff to understand, both for ourselves and for society. Okay, let's shift to another key area, connection. Specifically, participation in group activities. What did GFS find there?
The general finding is pretty clear. Regular participation in group activities, whether that's religious services or civic groups, tends to be linked with greater flourishing.
And that holds even after accounting for other factors.
Yes, they controlled for other known predictors, and the association remained. Being involved seems to matter.
Interesting. Is there a difference between religious involvement and, say, joining a community club or volunteering group?
Yes, and this was quite consistent. In most countries, 21 out of the 23 studied the positive link between religious service attendance and flourishing was stronger than the link between civic group participation and flourishing.
21 out of 23, that's a strong pattern. How much stronger?
Well, take the Philippines again. The average flourishing score was 0.86 points higher for weekly religious attenders versus non-attenders. For civic participation, the difference was only 0.17 points.
Big difference there.
Yeah, and similar large gaps were seen in Israel, Kenya, Nigeria, Poland, Turkey, and the U.S. Now, in some other places, like Australia, Spain, Sweden, Germany, the positive association was roughly similar for both types of engagement.
Okay, so not everywhere, but a common pattern. What about the impact on that meaning and purpose domain specifically?
That's where the difference was often even more pronounced. The positive link between attending religious services and understanding one's purpose in life was markedly larger than the link for civic participation in most countries.
So religious communities seem particularly potent for fostering a sense of purpose for many people globally.
That seems to be what the association suggests, yes.
Now, again, we need to be careful, right? This is an association found in the first wave. Correlation, not necessarily causation yet.
Exactly. The longitudinal data coming later will be key to understanding the why. Does attending services lead to more purpose, which then leads to more flourishing? Or are people with a strong sense of purpose drawn to these communities? We need more data to unpack those pathways.
But these associations are strong. And they come alive when you hear about real-world examples, don't they? You mentioned GFS researchers are also doing qualitative work.
Yes, which really helps add depth. For instance, they studied a place called the Town at Traylith near Atlanta. It's a community intentionally designed to foster flourishing, built for storytellers, artists, entrepreneurs.
Right. Their motto is be well, do good, together. What did they find there? How does that intentional design play out?
It seems to create a strong sense of shared purpose and connection. Residents talked about it explicitly. One said, "I really do want to flourish. And it's not just about me, it's about others in my community that I am connected to, and I want them to flourish as well."
Wow, that's a powerful statement of interconnectedness.
Isn't it? And another resident put it even more strongly. Love is what powers flourishing, and there's a communal aspect to it. If my neighbor isn't flourishing, then that has to be my problem. That really speaks to the GFS idea that community context is part of individual flourishing.
It really does. And then there's the incredibly striking example from a maximum security prison. Parchman in Mississippi. How does flourishing happen there?
It's an amazing example. Primarily through faith-based communities within the prison, these groups have apparently fostered incredible changes. Hope, purpose, gratitude, more pro-social behavior, and they've seen measurable declines in violence, misconduct, even suicides linked to these communities. It shows the power of connection and purpose, even in the absolute toughest environments.
The quotes are just incredible. A man on death row for over 30 years saying, "I found eternal life here. I have a hope and purpose that many on the outside do not have."
It's profound. And another inmate, after all these many years, I finally found an authentic community. I gave my life to God, and it was only then that I was able to finally forgive myself.
It just demonstrates so powerfully how community and shared meaning can fuel human flourishing, sometimes against all odds.
It really does. These examples, both the planned community and the prison, they vividly illustrate the kinds of factors the GFS data points towards.
So wrapping this all up, this deep dive into the first wave of the Global Flourishing Study, it really shows flourishing is rich, complex, definitely not one size fits all. We see some consistent themes like the importance of financial stability and community, but also huge variations across countries, across age groups.
Absolutely.
Right.
And the really exciting part is that this is just the start. The longitudinal design means we're going to learn so much more about the causes and pathways to flourishing in the coming years. The second wave of data is already out there collecting the third wave now, expecting results around spring 2026.
Yeah.
So the picture will keep getting clearer.
Which brings us to the final thought for you, the listener. We've talked about these 6 dimensions, the variations, the importance of community and purpose. So reflecting on all this, maybe ask yourself, given this multidimensional nature of flourishing, what single dimension, maybe it is purpose, maybe it's social connection, maybe health, maybe financial stability.
Yeah.
What feels most crucial for your well-being right now? And perhaps more importantly, what's one small concrete step you could take intentionally to nurture that specific area in your own life?
It's a good question to ponder, because this deep dive, hopefully, has given you that well-informed shortcut, a solid understanding of what the latest science is telling us about living a life well lived.
We certainly hope you found this insightful. Until next time on The Deep Dive, keep exploring.